Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. I know many of you would have probably preferred to be at a lake, enjoying this nice weather. But thank you so much for joining this discussion. Thank you as well for the online participants that we have. Yes, I think we are going to have a very interesting discussion here today. And just to start quickly, so my name is Romy Sato. I'll be your moderator here today. I am a journalist by training, but I have been working in the last 10 years as an advisor to development projects, mostly in the area of food security with organizations that promote food security or secured land rights to vulnerable communities in the Global South. And currently I'm working with a foundation called Land Portal Foundation, which aims at democratizing access to information on land issues. But anyways, I think the discussion here today, as you know, it's going to be about developing a fair and solidary food system. And I was thinking about this whole topic, and I think many figures and stories lately are telling us that our food systems are kind of ill. And I'm just going to say a few things now that are collected, not necessarily globally, but some cases also in countries. For example, that 1/3 of all food in South Africa goes to waste. And at the same time, approximately 10 million South Africans still go to bed hungry. So there is really a paradox there. And of course, worldwide, that we still have 9% of the population, around 697 million that this represents, are severely food insecure. Agriculture, as you know, is also a major contributor to climate change. And though the counting is not straightforward yet, I think there's still a lot of debates in science about how you really count the emissions from agriculture. According to a 2018 study, around 14% of annual CO2 emissions that are coming from humans or humanly driven, they are coming from the conversion of land, so land use. And with 10% of this land use directly related to agriculture. And the other thing is that our habits have also changed. And I tell here a little story that I also shared here in a conversation with our panelists before. I come from the Brazilian Amazon, and as a kid, I never had access to strawberries. I mean, strawberries was something that I first saw in my life, tasted when my family was going to visit the other part of the family, which is in Japan, so very far away. And now I go back home to Brazil, and all over in the supermarkets, you can find strawberries. So how to ensure that these habits, how to minimize the impact of these habits in the environment, but also how to avoid that these habits continue to reproduce a colonial system, a system of exploitation of workers in the Global South as well. So we don't know also where our food is really coming from. Now we are also disconnected from the producers of our food. We don't have the time anymore. No, the world needs to grow. Everything needs to be quicker. And I think as what they sent me to ask me to moderate here said, food is political, indeed. Our food system is strongly influenced by colonialism, and what fills our stomachs today may be contributing to global inequalities. So there is not a single vaccine to this disease now of the food systems. The treatment is complex, but as with health, I think prevention is the best treatment. Prevention in the sense of taking care that our choices are doing no harm or less harm as possible. Okay, we have chosen then today Martina, Okey, Samie, and Luciano to be here with us today. as our panelists because they are as well very much involved in a profound way with food. Be it as advocates for a more solidary food system, as researchers, as a business. And just to let you know, the way we are going to go about it, I'm going to make 4 rounds of questions to them, and at the end we'll have enough time to collect your questions as well. Without further delay, let me introduce Martina Backes. But Martina is a biologist and also a journalist at the magazine Informationszentrum 3 Welt in Freiburg. Samie Blasingame, she is a researcher, facilitator, creative director based in Berlin. I love this title, creative director. I really think it's really cool and very, holistic. She's passionate about environmental and climate justice and global food systems. Samie is also a member of the Black Earth Kollektiv, a climate and environmental justice group that advocates for more intersectional climate movement. We also have Okey Ugwu here on my side, and he's the co-founder of Fairfood, a food company here based in Freiburg. And finally, we have Luciano Ibarra. He's an agronomist, filmmaker, journalist, and founder of the Gartencoop, which is an initiative, a local farmers cooperative near Freiburg. All right, so let me just start, Luciano, with you at the tip. As I said, you are the founder of Gartencoop. An initiative where the members are producing food now in a solidary and ecological-based system. What motivated you to start this initiative?
So hello everybody, thank you also for the invitation. I'm originally from Chile, and I grew up in Europe. I had the chance to experience different places of the world. And I always sort of stayed in touch with movements from the south, especially also from Via Campesina. Throughout the late 90s and early 2000s, I was involved in what in English was called the Global Justice Movement, an organization called People's Global Action. And somehow the interaction with movements like the Movimento Sem Terra, the landless movement in Brazil, the Karnataka state farmers in India, or the black communities in Colombia. It was an amazing time because they were here in Europe, and we were organizing a lot of protests around the WTO, the World Trade Organization, especially demanding agriculture out of free trade agreements. And I sort of got quite influenced by the political discourse of Via Campesina, but also of the Zapatists in Chiapas. And one of the key experiences that influenced my motivation later on was the definition of solidarity. And we had just a sentence in the papers that we were writing, and it said, if you came here to help me, you can go back home. But if you consider your struggle as part of my struggle, then maybe we can work together. And that was one of the big questions that we were always asking this movement, is like, what is the best way we can support your struggle? And they said, create your own structures. Create your own structures. And this was a key experience for me because I saw, for example, the Movimento Sem Terra or the Colombians, black communities, they acting from, as a community and an area that you were sort of defending from all these capitalist models and oppression, gave them much more legitimacy in their actions. And here in the north, the movements were very much focused on sort of counter-summit protests that I experienced as a sort of fireworks, which gave us a lot of visibility, and we were sort of changing debate, but not really having structures, long-lasting structures from which we could act out, and really changing also the human relations in our communities. So that was one of the key motivations, and to say, okay, we need to create structures here, and I was quite influenced by the Jardin de Cocagne in Geneva, which is also where the WTO is, and that is the oldest cooperative in Europe implementing the model of community-supported agriculture. And so that gave us also the confidence that we could reproduce this kind of system here. And this is basically how we started exactly 12 years ago, and now we have managed to implement it for 10 years here around Freiburg. We are feeding 300 families or households, about 750 people around Freiburg, mainly with the production of vegetables. And we try to implement a quite agroecological system with a solidarity economy and a lot of participation from members, but also a professional team for which we try to create very attractive working conditions. And we've had quite success so far.
Thank you, Luciano. But so the members of the cooperative, they are also the ones working on it. To get the food, they also have to work. It's not that you can sign up to get a basket of vegetables.
Well, we have a professional team that coordinates the production. These are quite young but trained people to do the farming, and we expect from our members to participate 5 times a year. But it's some will participate more, some a bit less. But in the end, we have no sanction mechanism. Some other CSAs are more strict. We don't have that. But I always say, you know, if it works about, say, 70%, and for me, 70% of utopia is still quite good for this project.
Good point. Martina, I'll turn now to you. In February this year, Martina has written a detailed article. Now, the title is A Bitter Aftertaste, Colonial Traces in the Global Food Regime. So for those who didn't read it yet, what do you explore in your article? And what motivated you to choose this topic?
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. I think it's really a nice chance to share some insights. And coming back to your question, or by the way, my link to the cooperative, I'm a silent member of your cooperative since the beginning, and I was really feeling bad because I couldn't find out how I can work on the fields for 5 days because of health problems, so but I'm still a silent member. Coming back to your question, colonialism in our food system. There are some personal experiences I would like to bring up, or maybe one, and on top of that, okay, the editorial team of our magazine had planned a focus on food, on the global food system last year, and then the pandemic came in, the numbers of people who are really hungry, they raised, there are some 135 million more people really in insecure conditions. So this was also, I think the public will get aware of it actually because also of this prize award for the World Food Program, and this really annoyed me. It annoyed me, although the public awareness for hunger was raising, but at the same time, the understanding of the underlying causes, they get less. So I was thinking of how can I contribute to our main focus on global food systems in the magazine, and at the same time trying to somehow explain the many, many reasons why actually it's agriculture, it's the global dominant, conservative, conventional agricultural system that is not fighting hunger, but that is also creating hunger. So this brought me back to the colonial days, of course. And then I remembered also a very personal experience. Actually, I was part of the so-called development cooperation in various contexts. I was doing some kind of research on agroforestry, for instance, in Rwanda, and I was working in extension projects, agricultural extension projects in Kenya, which were also meant to somehow fight hunger. So during those days, I mean, this was in the beginning of the 90s, at the beginning, particularly in Kenya, I realized that the expectations of my co-partners, the expectations of, for instance, the local or divisional agricultural staff, and also of the so-called target group. I don't like this expression, by the way, but you know what I mean. Those expectations didn't match with what was my idea about my personal role within this project. So this time there was already a big movement of very critical agroecologists that I was in touch with because of the so-called green revolution in the agricultural system. And my idea was that I should look into the local system and see what kind of indigenous trees and shrubs could help the women to have enough firewood to have a nice meal, things like that. But they expected me to bring, for instance, eucalyptus seeds, watering cans, finance, fertilizer, all this kind of stuff. And of course, they could not understand that my idea of my role was a different one. So I realized that I was somehow stepping within the footsteps of the colonial ancestors, which were the British. And I mean, it took us months to get an understanding of each other's role, and it was finally a book that helped us out, a book which came up from the Overseas Development Institute and the university in Nairobi, and the title was More People, Less Erosion. So the mainstream or the dominant prevailing assumption of the development communities of the agricultural experts and so on was that the growth, population growth in the area was the problem of the destruction of the ecological system and erosion and water management and all this kind of stuff. And this book, actually the predominant idea was the more people, the more erosion. And in fact, the book showed in very nice pictures the more people, less erosion, because it was actually the system of the colonializers who destructed the soil, who destructed grazing land and all this kind of stuff. And the more people came back into the area trying to produce their small-scale agricultural understanding, the less erosion you could find. So this was actually the motivation to write the article, which is not a detailed article. It's just about a few hotspots on the colonial imprint in the modern agricultural system.
I'm looking forward to explore during this conversation the details of that. And now I turn to Okey. Thank you very much, Martina. Okey, yes, you have started your business, I think, 2012 or 13? 15, sorry. And you were sourcing cashew nuts from Nigeria. Yeah. Exactly, and selling them in Freiburg. So, and what's different in your business model from the business as usual model? How did you get to this idea and to found this company?
Good day. Thank you for having me here. My name is Okey Ugwu. I come from Aku. Aku is in Enugu State. Enugu State is in southeast of Nigeria. The reason why we started to start doing something different from what is obtainable in Deutschland is the need for fairness in business relationship, the way food is being produced and distributed. The current global system of food distribution and production is such that the farmers, those that produce the product, suffer so much, while the market institutions and corporate bodies are the people that are cashing in in most of the agricultural foods, leaving little or none to the farmers. When we established Fairfood in 2015, our primary aim is to process cashew in Nigeria and bring it fresh and direct to Deutschland. We started, and we had a lot of hindrances, mostly from policies that regulate the market. Because cashews, raw cashews, is a tropical crop and grow mostly in tropical land. And more than 80% of the world cashews are produced in Africa. The business people, the cashew stakeholders, come to Africa, get these materials, package it in a container, ship it through the sea to many continents, to Asia, India, and Vietnam. This is where the cashews are processed. After processing, they bring the cashew crossing many continents back to Europe, where the customers use the product. Fairfood, when this particular raw cashew nut is taken to Indians, all the value chains that comes with the cashews are also exported abroad. The cashews that we eat is no longer fresh and of no high quality. When Fairfood started operation, we realized that most of the money, dividend that come from the agricultural activities as concerned cashews, goes mostly to the big bodies. So we decided to establish a small production plant where we process cashews and bring it down to Germany. That particular act enhanced our ability of employing more than 30 workers. From these 30 workers, 98% of these particular workers are women. These are women that have lost their work. These are women that, because of one circumstances or the other, they lost their husband and they don't have any help. They feel they don't belong in the society because they cannot be able to fend for themselves. So when we come into production, we identify all those people and bring them into production, and from them they can at least get stipendium for self-sustenance. If we had taken the cashews to India to process it, I think such opportunities will not come to all those women. There will not be hope for such. What motivated us is that most of the cashews and food products we take in in Germany, the customers doesn't even ask how do the food come from. Does this particular food come observing all the necessary regulations? We were established in 2015 and we'll have this principle of fair trade. That was the driving spirit that made us to start this particular company. And since then, we make sure that in any community that we are transacting business with, that will take those people at high esteem, because it will encourage them, it will provide more food for them, it will provide self-reliance, and it will give hope.
Thank you. Okay, I want to come back to this point precisely in a minute. about the impact there. Before we go to this point in more detail, let me just also turn to Samie Blasingame. And Samie, you have a story with climate justice and global food systems. How is this story? Where did it start, and how do you see the two issues that are related?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Also from my side, thank you for having me. Yeah, I think I've always been quite a justice-oriented person, and always, I think my mother probably instilled a bit of curiosity about the world and about food in me at a young age. And I come from the San Francisco Bay Area in California, so it's where the farm-to-fork kind of concept was initiated by Alice Waters, so I think that there's a bit of that ingrained in me somehow. But it wasn't really until I moved to Berlin in 2015 that I got into food and ag more professionally. I came to Berlin to do a master's program in environmental policy and planning, and in my second semester, I started working with a group of researchers that were focused on food security, sustainable land management, and soil health. And I worked with them for a couple years, first as a communicator and then as a research associate. And yeah, my work was always very community-based, really focused on trying to amplify the stories and realities of the land stewards and farmers that we were working with. But I was also very acutely, or I became over time very acutely aware of the inequalities that are present and perpetuated within development work and within the development field. Martina's already touched on that a bit, but yeah, so I felt that there was so many projects being done where people were patting themselves on the back for what they had done, but still so many farmers were just trying to exist in systems, economic and power systems that are left over from colonialism. So yeah, that also, and dealing with a changing climate, which makes it much harder to do agriculture in the ways that they were used to. So yeah, that really is the connection between climate justice and global food systems. You already shared quite a bit of statistics on the impact that food and agriculture and then land conversion has on our climate. And so I think that there's so much potential there to support farmers toward a more ecologically resilient and socially sustainable food system. And yeah, but although there is that potential, I still feel that the conversation that I was hearing and that is happening around food and agriculture isn't truly questioning this status quo. So, and beyond that, I felt that the decision-making power was often, being held by often white males and not very diverse. And so that's when I started to look for alternatives, other people trying to bring these conversations to light, and I got involved with Black Earth, which again is this environmental and climate justice collective in Berlin, and connecting with them, but also with my passion for communication and storytelling, I really became interested in amplifying the voices, again, and realities of people fighting for food and land justice, whether that was food deserts in the United States or food apartheid in places like occupied Palestine, or even places like Senegal, where lots of EU surplus is flooding local markets and stifling their ability to have food autonomy themselves. So yeah, for me it's very important to highlight these injustices and ensure that the people fighting these systems are never silenced. So that's sort of where my work really focuses on and where my connection to it is. I think that food sovereignty, the idea of food sovereignty, that is really focusing on consumers and distributors and producers and our needs, rather than these multinational companies, is very important because they still have quite a stronghold, these multinational companies, on our food system, and that obviously has a lot of social and environmental ripple effects. Yeah.
Thank you, Samie. You talked about a status quo, no? And now I think I would like to make a bridge here to go a bit in depth into this the roots of this status quo. And I'll turn now to Martina. Martina, in your article, you demonstrate now that the colonialism is deeply imprinted in our global food system. Can you share with us a bit the story of the sugar production? Elaborate on that to demonstrate how is that?
I'll try. I think most people know already a lot about sugar production, and at the same time, of course, it's one of the best examples of showing how deeply the colonial system is imprinted in our food system. That's right. So sugar production, I won't talk about beet, but about sugar cane, of course, which is native to New Guinea in Southeast Asia, and was brought to the Mediterranean area about 8,000 years ago. So it was then Christopher Columbus who took some cuttings, sugarcane cuttings, on his second trip to the Caribbean, to Hispaniola, Haiti. Nowadays it's Haiti. And there was a Spanish order that the people, the settlers and the indigenous people, the Taínos, they were supposed to cultivate sugarcane in big plantations. So without this Spanish order, the history of sugarcane would be different, I guess. And it was a kind of tribute system that violently forced those people to grow sugarcane. So finally they were forced to a level whereby we must say the Taínos, the indigenous peoples to Haiti, were decimated, and this is now the time when slave trade came in. So there were these slave traders coming from European dictatorships, going to West Africa, taking slaves, their workforce, and together with palm oil. That's quite interesting. The oil palm is native to West Africa, and this was the food for the slaves. So they traded the work of the slaves to the Caribbean, whereby they exchanged what they got with the materials like sugar, raw sugar, but also cotton and other kind of stuff, going back then to Europe to trade it back against weapons, and then the weapons were brought to the West African countries. So there they traded the weapons and took the slaves, and this is a kind of Atlantic triangle trade, which was the beginning of the sugarcane plantations. So nowadays, during that time, there was really a high demand for sugarcane in Europe, of course, because of the alcohol, rum, but the raw sugar as well. It was a luxury. It was really a luxury. And imagine today you want to try to eat, to have a diet only for one day without any sugar in it. This is really a challenge today. So you see, sugar is all over. There is about 75% of the sugar comes from sugarcane, and again, 75% of this sugar is used by the bakery industry, soft drinks, whatever kind of ketchup. There is so many food stuff you can't hardly get without sugar. And this really imprinted our system, our food system, in a certain way, and at the same time it increased kind of health problems such like diabetes, especially within the communities of poor people nowadays, although sugar was a luxury during those days, you see. So maybe more talking about the way of the agricultural production, the plantation pattern with cheap labor, that is now the other side of the coin, or that's an additional side we should mention here. All the work, the forced labor, slavery, there was the abolishment of slavery, a long history. I want to keep it short. We still have these cutters of sugarcane who have really a kind of slave-like working conditions, very badly paid off, no security. They are exposed to hazards like from pesticides. The working conditions are so bad. I think
child labor, no?
Yeah, child laborhood and things like that. I think it's really reported in the public media from all over the world, especially from the big sugarcane plantations in Brazil and India and so on. And when we are talking about Eaters for Food Autonomy and about a different kind of food production system, I think we should always also think about the laborers working in food systems, or the workers, or the work in general. And this is really one part which started with the colonial system, and still you have those conditions. Not to talk about land tenure, about indigenous knowledge systems that have been eroded, the land concentration. There are so many things you can show which are still alive in this kind of sugarcane production. Same with palm oil. I mean, the travel of the oil palm started with the slavery from West Africa to many, many countries. And when you look into the production patterns of modern agriculture in oil palm plantations, you find almost the same problems like in sugarcane plantations. So far?
Yeah, great, thanks. Yeah, so still many roots in there. Now the system hasn't changed. So the problem, would you agree to say that the problem is not the existence of or the consumption of these products in itself, but the way the system behind it to produce it?
No, it's both sides. Of course, you always have to think about consumption patterns and production patterns, and there's a lot of comfort also. We really, yes, a kind of comfort like we can get very cheap food, which is the outcome of this modern agricultural system, and we have to think about these kind of comforts we are enjoying, and if we want to shift the food system, and if we want to have more food sovereignty, not just food security. The concept of food security and food sovereignty is, for me, really a different thing. If we want to have more food sovereignty, if we want to have more environmentally friendly production systems and workers and decent who have got decent work, then we have to change the consumer patterns as well. So it's both sides. Maybe even it's not really very helpful by using this language of producers on the one hand and consumers on the other hand. I mean, this kind of language is really shaped by a very capitalist way of thinking within the agricultural system in general. And I think we have to overcome this, and we have to think about different relationships and connectedness, and yes.
Thanks. I would like to go back later on this point of how can we reshape this language. That would be interesting. But you talked about sovereignty and food sovereignty, and I'd like to turn now to the example more of these days as well. I mean, sugar, of course, remains these days with everything you just described. But in Nigeria, okay, we had talked previously, and you had, in an earlier conversation, you told me that there is really little incentive for Africa to industrialize, to break the dependency. Rich countries don't want that. And I would like to know, what do you observe in Nigeria that supports this perspective?
Actually, production and distribution of food, to make this chain to be continuous, there must be a pattern of food preservation or even processing. Processing of most of this food requires machines, requires power and other technical know-hows to work. I feel there is a grand conspiracy by the big countries, that Africa, or especially Nigeria, would not be industrialized, so that all these products, agricultural products, will be shipped in Asia and other, Vietnam and other countries for processing and distribution. This particular conspiracy or this particular act have really affected the way food is being processed, produced, and distributed. It have never helped anybody in Africa. Rather, it have never alleviated any poverty in Africa. Rather, it pushes us back to poverty level. I believe that Western nations should encourage or support Africa to at least have basics knowledge and material for processing of most of their agricultural products. Most of the food we cultivated, more than 60% of them goes waste because we don't have the real knowledge of how to preserve or the real technology involved in the preservation of most of these goods. And if encouraged, it will help a lot of other stakeholders in each individual food department to grow more. Take for instance, if I am a farmer that produces maize, automatically I cannot be able to eat all the maize I produce in a season. There is need for preservation. Sun drying might not be the only active way of preserving this food. It might be required that I can crack this particular maize in small pieces and store it so that you can use it as grease and every other thing. This technical know-how is what is lacking mostly in African countries. And in many places where such know-hows are available, there is no engine room to push such. And this particular engine room is power.
Just to ask you, where do you find this technical know-how?
You find this technical know-how in European nations, in the Western nations. This technical know-how involves how to generate electricity, how to use electricity. Any country that cannot be able to develop electricity will not be able to take care of what they produce locally. And the West have kept a blind eyes to most African nations in this particular aspect. I believe that if we are given opportunity, or if we are given this particular technical know-how and materials, that it will help us to preserve our food and enhance food security.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so it's about also bringing more visibility to the knowledge that already exists. Yeah. No? And I would like to talk about something else that it's also needed, and that comes to land. No, it's a topic that is also dear to my heart, and I would like also to have this conversation with Samie, who also has experience in this area. And like for any of us, now in our jobs, we need also our inputs, we need the resources with which to work. And land, of course, is one of these key resources. Agriculture starts with that. And Luciano, you probably also have this experience when searching for the land for your initiative. And in your experience, Samie, what land pressures do communities face in the global South? And why do you defend communal management of agricultural land?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I feel like I defend it where it is desired, where it makes sense, because I think people who are using and enjoy land should decide for themselves whether they want to create the structures that allow for communal management. But we also do know that land that is communally managed, there's many studies that shows that is the most sustainably managed land, when it is managed communally. So yeah, there is that. I also, what was your first question? Sorry.
In general, I mean, if you think about the experience when you were also in Kenya, accompanying those communities, what did you experience? What did you see there in terms of their struggles with land issues?
Yeah, so I support this when it makes sense. And for example, the first project I worked on in Western Kenya, in Kakamega County, was with a community that was facing a lot of land division issues. The system is that the land is divided and given to children, mostly male children. And so they were in a situation where there was very little land per person. And so this community in particular was, they had a lot of land leasing going on. And so this woman named Violet Shivutse, with the community health workers, was leading the project, more or less, to bring together the community to create community land lease guidelines. And so in this case, the land is privately owned by these different family members, but the community came together to create these guidelines that would allow them all to agree on how land should be managed, and also the regulations between leasing with one another, because there was lots of conflict going on. And so in this case, it's not communally owned, but it is community managed, and I think that is a very positive way to look at it as well. There's also the example of the Maya biosphere in Guatemala, which is a great example of land being redesignated as use rights, for use rights. So the land is a biosphere, it's conservation, but the community, together with non-indigenous groups, also lobbied for land to be repurposed so that they could use it. And what they saw over time was that that land got much more diversity and was much better managed than the pure, narrow conservation land directly next to it. So those things are very important. And the land pressures that I'm seeing for the Global South. I mean, in general, I think that the pressure for farmers, even here as well, we see it in Brandenburg. There's a couple really awesome organizations looking to secure land for smallholder farmers, like the Acker-Syndikat, or something called Das Flaschensicherung. I'm probably pronouncing it horribly. But these organizations are working to secure land for smallholder farmers, and them, as well as farmers in the Global South, I think, are pressured by a dominant paradigm that tells us that we cannot feed the world through ecologically resilient practices or farming practices. And that is it's just not true. We can feed the world this way. And so the pressure that we're seeing is from mostly land being grabbed to make these huge monocultures to feed the world, supposedly. But if you were to support small farmers in the practices that are taking care of land and thus people, there's lots of potential there.
Thank you.
Romy, yes. I don't know, can I add something?
Yes, of course. Let's make this a conversation, of course.
I didn't know that you have been working in Kakamega, or you have been in Kakamega. Actually, I was right on the other side of the big river in Bungoma, which is also in Western Kenya, and my experience...
We're also there.
My experience with land rights there is really interesting, I think, or also the way of how land was dedicated to agricultural production. Like what I experienced, I was already talking about this book, More People, Less Erosion. So in Bungoma, there is one division that's an administrative unit, one division that is called White Settlement Scheme, which formerly were the White Highlands, where the settlers, the British and Italian and German and I don't know, settlers from Europe were doing agriculture. And mainly they were introducing cash crops such like maize. They did a lot of grazing, things like that. And still the farms of the Kenyan people who have been resettled there are really huge. And they copied somehow the system. Now when you go right to the other side of the road, there was the so-called native reserve where the indigenous people from this area of Western Kenya, the Bukusu people, were supposed to stay. They were working on the white farms, and this area is really incredibly densely populated, more than 500 people per square meters in some areas. But the agricultural system is so diverse. You find each and every food crop. You have a lot of food in the markets. You have a very diverse cropping system with mixed cropping and agriculture, agroforestry systems. I can't say that the people there are less poor than the others in terms of income, but they have still their customary laws whereby they share certain plots that are used at the beginning of the year for grazing, later on for agriculture, and in the third stance for something like gleaning. Nobody knows what gleaning is probably. It's kind of picking up the overlefts of the last agricultural period. So the land system and what they were actually practicing there really brought up a really biological diversity, which is immense, and also they have still a lot of different care systems for soil fertility and things like that, which are very important for a resilient agricultural system. So this is all linked to land issues somehow.
And diversity. Thanks. Do you want to respond to that?
Not necessarily respond, but just the fact that, we, in Kakamega, it was the first time that I saw how abundant these spaces could be if they're managed in this way, that is, interconnected. And so even there, or in Malawi, my favorite farmer is in Malawi, Luayo, and had a very small plot of land that's now grown into something called the Permaculture Paradise Institute. And you can see how productive a space can be if you understand agroecology and are implementing it in that way. And I'm really amazed to see how big the institute has grown. I mean, it's him and his wife and his kids, and they teach the people. They started by just communicating with the farmers around them, and then slowly the government also started getting involved in sending their extension workers to them to be trained. And so when we talk about spreading technological knowledge, I mean, they also use that word in agriculture, the technologies that are needed, but really it's the practices, right? The
practices, not traditional, most often.
But
yes,
I was reading it, sorry, just one more thing. I was reading an article earlier about how 600 million hectares of land are managed by smallholder farmers and using some sort of conservation agriculture, so you would say. And it was in criticism of the World Resources Institute that put out an article recently saying that regenerative agriculture won't save us. And I have my criticisms about that term, but it was also saying that, this wasn't possible. But again, it is, and how are we prioritizing it?
This whole discourse that it isn't possible. And I want to pick on that because one of the questions that I also have for Luciano was also on the topic of risk. One of the things that I heard quite often when I was working with a community of donors supporting projects all over the world on food security is that agriculture is a risky business. No, so there is a kind of a taboo for investing more on it because it's risky, and particularly in the global south, you cannot. There are many factors in there that many producers cannot guarantee their produce at the end of the season. How do you go about that? About Gartencoop, how do you manage this risk? Is this really something that makes sense to talk in these terms?
Mm-hmm. Well, the risk is mainly for the people that are involved in agriculture itself. Risk can also be a situation if you have bad harvests and so on. Generally, people involved in the trade, they manage to benefit from it. So we have to really see it as from the perspective of people producing and all people consuming directly from those farms. I think the short answer to the issue of risk is resilience. That is basically what we have to build. And I see two forms of resilience. One is human resilience, and the other would be ecological resilience. In terms of human resilience and our model with community-supported agriculture, of course, it's the community. If we've had, for example, a storm that destroyed part of our infrastructure. We can see that there are tougher conditions for the future coming, like more drought. It will be much more difficult to deal with the weather patterns that are changing and so on, less rain. And basically, if we have this kind of challenges, we can rely on our community to finance, repairings, means of production, because all the means of productions of our farms are collectively owned from our community. And also, because we made a commitment, we basically have a commitment between our communities, the 750 people, and the farmers, and we say we share both the bad harvest and the good harvest. And we try, of course, to make a production that will be oriented towards our needs, but sometimes we may have more, sometimes we may have less. So that is our way of sharing the risk together. But basically, if you as a farmer involved in CSA, we're subject to bad weather and so on, it will be that is a risk that is shared by every one of us. Now, in terms of ecology, things are getting, I think this will become more and more important in the future because we are moving into a situation of a much hotter climate. We are moving into a situation where the risks are getting bigger and bigger, and this is just, this is all over the planet. It will not be just here. The climate crisis is leading to a situation right now. The Arctic is melting. The difference of temperature between the Arctic and the equator is changing. Is becoming lower. The jet streams are becoming weaker and wavier, and that is leading to weather extremes, seen now from the northern hemisphere perspective, where we're starting to experience this with several areas of food production, being Europe, North America, Eastern Europe, Asia, and so on, are coming under very strong stress. Now, we will have in the future situations where these kinds of extremes will happen simultaneously on those production sites, food production sites. And the situation is pretty predictable. We will have a decrease in production in sometimes very key areas like the Midwest, for example, in the US, which feeds a large part of the world. Or right now, for example, there's an extreme drought in California. And that will influence the world market, which means the wealthier nations will be able to buy a lot of the crops from the world market, leaving less food available for other parts of the world. This is a completely predictable situation in which we are moving now towards the future. The world in 2018, for example, produced less cereals than it consumed in 2019. We were able to, because of some reserves available, we could basically deal with that situation. But that kind of resilience is the one we are losing. So, in terms of ecological resilience, we have to invest right now, it's really an investment, in very healthy soils. We have to change we have to change the practice into an agroecological practice, which is going to improve the soil organic matter, we need levels that are very high, because the experience is showing from the projects, and especially small-scale projects that do have very high levels of good health in their soils and high level of soil organic matter, the plants can withstand the kind of weather extremes that we are going to have in the future, be it flood or long periods of drought. The plants can take that better in. So we need absolutely that. And one key element as well, in my eyes, will be seeds, because we have a worldwide system that is impoverishing enormously the biodiversity, but also what we call the gene pool of in the seeds. And for example, the Gartencoop took the political decision during its foundation to say we will use 100% pure seeds. In German, it's samenfeste Sorten. It's 100% pure peasant seeds, and the gene pool involved in those seeds is way larger. So when we have these new stresses coming up like now that, drought and temperature changes and so on, the plants, in fact, they can react to that. They can go back in their memory, if you want, and then we can see in that diversity how basically the plants of the future. And if we rely just on the hybrid seeds from the companies, we are losing that gene pool. So that, I think, will be key, because the seeds are a means of production for the future. So,
thank you.
Human resilience, ecological resilience, seeds.
Very good points. Human resilience. Yes, and I'm wondering, to go back, in your experience in Nigeria, you were talking in the beginning about 95% of the workers in Nigeria being women. Do you see this human resilience being created there? What are the impacts of your business there?
Yeah. Actually, I said 85% or 95% are women. They are women because we were able to identify most of these women that really need this work in the processing section. It's not only the resilience in production. Fairfood presently have also engaged a lot of women and youth farmers to go into agriculture, to go into organic cashew farming, side by side with other cash crops. Cashew, if planted today, will take 4 to 5 years before it starts growing, or it starts germinating and giving harvest. What is the fate of farmers within these 3-4 years? Would they be waiting until their first yield? That is one of the resilience. But in order to reduce it, we also devised a model that as cashews are planted 6 meters apart, there are many space. The farmers can use this particular empty space to plant other cash crops like cassava, cocoyam, and every other thing that will be sustaining them until when this particular cashew start giving back fruit. The resilience is from our own experience. We find out that mostly women are the people that show more interest in agricultural activities in the present world, because the way the process of production and distribution is not encouraging that most youth, future generations that will have gotten into agriculture is being discouraged because of how the systems runs. I wouldn't want to do a business that at the end of the day I will be finding it difficult to survive. That is the issue about Africa, agriculture and global food security. Those agencies that monitor and regulate it should do the needfuls and at least make agriculture competitive and also make agriculture to be something that one will be proud to say, I am a farmer. I am a farmer myself. I am talking based on experience. Up to this moment, I have been in Dutchland for close to 15 years. But every year, I make sure I farm in my land. I use the proceeds to help those people destitute or people that cannot afford food, thereby contributing my little quota to global food security and autonomy. I think the resiliency are more with women. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. I think we are now coming to a last round, and I would like to explore a few possibilities, suggestions of things we can do, or that we can try to influence on. I was thinking about your article, Martina, in your critiques to also a lot of international organizations that were founded with the very mission to fight food insecurity and poverty, but that they are probably not fulfilling that role, on the opposite. So is there a way to reform such organizations? Is there one action that could be done?
It's funny because you're already putting it like in brackets. They are fighting for food security. Sure, they do. That's what they say. You're asking for reforms. Maybe first of all, let me once mention that the food system is the result of this colonial system, like we were talking about resilience, and the resilience was somehow also eroded and silenced by eroding the mixed cropping and the different seeds and all that kind of stuff. And it's the research institutes that were also working in the interest of, formerly the colonialists, and nowadays it's more or less the big agricultural companies who are working on very, very few species. Let's have a look into our diet. I think even more than half of our diet comes from only 6 different plants. And that's maize, it's maybe soya, rice, wheat. That's it. Sugar, of course. I should mention sugar. There are 30,000 different edible plants found in agroecological systems, and there are 50,000 different edible plants known, and they could help us to restore the resilience as well. So now reforms for international organization. Of course,
collapse, total collapse.
Of course, they changed a lot. There are strategies. They are always talking about resilience, about coping strategies, about food security. Actually, they co-opted a lot of really good approaches which come out of these agroecological movement and movements that are in touch with this, which are really nice ideas. But at the end of the day, it's mainly things like fertilizer, like maize production, like precision agriculture that is really fostered, because the link between agricultural research and the interest of the companies who have the financial power is so dense that it is really difficult to change the whole system. I mean, there are things we can't say we don't need them any longer, like hunger relief organizations, humanitarian organizations. Of course, we will need them because of locust infection in invasion in Eastern Africa, for instance, last year. We still need them, and they are doing a good job, partly a good job. And they also have got their standards like do no harm. They are no longer airlifting maybe food products from the US, which was originally done because the relief organizations were also meant to get rid of their surplus of agricultural production in the US. That's what USAID did for decades. I don't believe in reforms any longer. That's the problem. So I think what we need is we have to take back the economy. We have to find a different language for community economy. We have to take back land. We have to try to find solutions how we can turn land that is privately owned into community-owned or community stewardship land. Solutions like this. Same with the seeds. We need solutions how we can share seeds and share the knowledge so that each and everybody is allowed to use those seeds for their own experimental, small-scale ideas and not just having a few companies who is then licensing the seeds. So reforms won't work. That's my belief. I don't trust them.
Thanks. Samie, what do you think about it also, having worked also with international organizations? I mean, she also mentioned changing the language. I think you also work in a space where language is extremely important as communicator. Do you also refer to that? Do you experience this need?
Yes, I agree. I also don't really believe in reforms anymore. Mm-hmm. I believe in grassroots community people coming together, and my work right now is really focused now on urban food systems and connecting to farmers in around cities. So I mean, I'm in Berlin, so that's farmers in Brandenburg, and it's really, my work is really about understanding where we're at as individuals in a community and trying to inspire this vision for the structures we need to create a more ecologically and socially resilient food system. So yeah, beyond land rights, and I mentioned some of the people working to secure land for smallholder farmers in Brandenburg, beyond that and seed-saving movements, food education is also really, truly important, and there's a couple awesome people working on that. In general, trying to inspire in consumers this very real thing that our diets are very limited to the potential that we have for the food that can be grown around us. And so one example is this new company called Beano. And I mention them a lot because they started in October 2020 in Berlin, working with small farmers within 20 kilometers of the city to they have like meal delivery services, and it's low waste, and it comes with these nice recipes. And I thought it was so interesting because throughout the winter, they had such interesting recipes for people to inspire how to use winter vegetables. And there's this, image that there's not much growing in the winter time. So I think it's super important to inspire in people the different ways we can use our food and what is actually available to us. So food education like that, also solidarity agriculture systems that also the individual groups of people that share recipes with each other, very important. And then, food hubs. There's lots of local food hubs. It's very big in the United States, but also in Berlin, there's something called the Kiez Farm, and the idea is that it's in a Kiez, and it's a space where it could be a depot for a solidarity agriculture system. They grow their own food through hydroponics, maybe, but also a place for people to come and learn about the food that's available around them and how to use it. That. And finally, my last thing that I think needs to be supported is the connection of this local food to everyday eatery places. I see it a lot with fine dining restaurants, but we really need to be shifting to where most people eat. In Berlin, that is the donor shops, for example, or like the Cantina. So there's this really awesome initiative called Kantine Zukunft that was just funded by the Berlin Senat. And the idea is to inspire how to source local food within this very small budget that cantinas have. And I think focusing on these public spaces where people are eating is necessary, as well as inspiring individual people to think about how they're sourcing their food.
Thanks, Samie. Luciano, over to you to inspire us. What can we do for us who wants to engage more in a solidary food system but don't know where to start from? What would you recommend? What can be done tomorrow? What can be done in 6 months?
Well, not just tomorrow and in 6 months. I think really important right now is really to have the long vision, because what we need now is an empathy over many generations. The choices we are doing today, we're taking today, will have a lot of consequences in the future. The next coming decade, the next 10 years will be crucial to really prevent the climate crisis, or how bad the climate crisis is going to be for all of us. So I believe it's really, it's choices that we make today, but we have to keep in mind that we are doing this for the generations to come. So I believe there's not just like one recipe. We need like a diverse movement of initiatives. I am sort of very much rooted in the CSA, the solidarity system, and I think we have tried out quite a lot of Ansätze, a lot of things that can be basically implemented also on the larger scale in society. Let me mention a few. First of all, the idea that we are trying to gather the money or the necessary cost to pay for agriculture. It's the idea of getting rid of the system of free trade. We are basically saying food is not a commodity. Food is not for sale. Food production is really something about feeding our bodies, our communities, and the soils, and basically also the environment where we are. It's about the relationships we have among each other. That's what food production, agriculture is about. So getting rid of the market system, or overcoming that at least, or finding solidarity ways of dealing with the market. If we can't do a revolution from today to tomorrow, but we have to deal with what is there. So I think that is one of the crucial things to implement. Secondly, the way we organize labor. For the moment, we have a system that is increasingly, or at least here in Europe, very much capital intensive, big machinery, large monocultures, completely alienating the world of food production. We have to change that, and we have to make an attractive world of production. Young people have to be motivated to work in agriculture. I had the chance just a few days ago on Wednesday to see a big round of about 30 to 40 young people, that were being trained to get become vegetable farmers. It was very inspiring. There is a generation out there of people that are willing to do that kind of job, but we need to support them to do those kind of steps. And we will need to use the resources from our communities, from our society, in order to finance means of production, in order to finance new farms, in order to collectivize the land, the soil, this means of productions. So that is definitely something that we can do. We can create, for example, the food hubs you were mentioning, we also have an initiative here where we would like to create, we call them Lebensmittelpunkte, which is basically similar to the idea of food hub, places where the food is going to come, but also it could also be meals, not just the food for cooking. And we combine that with a lot of educational work, a lot of places where we can involve people in the actual administration of the place, but also in agriculture. Because the division, as we were mentioning at the beginning, the division between producers and consumers is very strict in our society. When you buy a piece of vegetable, say a salad or so, in a grocery store, that's where your information ends. That's it. And we, with projects like the Gartencoop, we would like to get people in touch with the conditions of production. And especially if they are close to our city, that is an enormous opportunity. And I see that in our community. We ask people to come 5 times a year at the farm. The experience of being involved in that agricultural work, even for just a couple of hours, even if it's just a few days per year, that is an experience that nobody can take away from you. This is something where you have a physical experience that another world is possible. And this is the kind of things that we should be multiplying and creating. Because, basically, before we had this industrial system, especially when you have peaks, Erntespitzen, when you have peaks in harvest and you have a lot of intensive work to do, this is the times where we involve the community in those jobs. And that's been lost. I think we should have a 2.0 form of that. And I think we have this, especially through the social networks and modern communication, we can involve our communities in that kind of work. So I see a lot of potential. Just to finish with one more thing. For example, Freiburg, like the municipality made a study, about 13% of the vegetables consumed in Freiburg are from the region. 13. That is ridiculous, since we are a region that can produce a lot of vegetables, for instance. And I see that as potential. We could easily move to a system that could provide, 80, 90%, maybe 95% of the vegetables that we eat could be produced in our region, for example.
Thank you, Luciano. We need to reconnect ourselves with our systems, with our environment. Well, thank you all for listening and to hear your patience. Now we are going to move to questions and answer. If I didn't mention this before, I just want to reinforce this is being done in partnership with Agrikultur Festival. And again, thanks for those also watching us through the online stream, live stream. Before we just move to you raising your hands, I would like to give you a chance to also talk to each other. You may not stand up to go too far from where you are, unfortunately, but I just wanted to propose that if you can talk to somebody, your neighbor, no worries if it's going to be a bit loud. I think we need more noise here, it's too silent. And I would like to propose if you can talk to your neighbor from where you are, what is the most interesting thing that you heard here today, or any burning question that you have after this discussion? Just introduce yourselves. It's a chance for us to reconnect, connect to each other again after this long pause of COVID and too many Zoom calls, and talk to face to face. We'll give a minute to that. Talk also with each other.
Yeah. Never know.
The language, because it shapes our thinking and our conception of the reality.
We'll have 2 rounds of questions.
And I think when we were talking about resilience, what all comes with resilience is reproductive work and activity. So there are so many things that even our job, they kind of research. So now when we come to they say we need money to our research, and then we have to sell our products. There's research. So who is investing in our kind of research? And I think we have to get aware of what small farmers and communities and initiatives like those ones from what they are really doing. It's not commodified, but the you decided to drop the question. Subsidy is really complicated. And I'm not an expert in that anyhow.
It's just also because of time.
Very good.
You did a great job. Okay. Still have some minutes.
Maybe you and Luciano very much thinking, life cycle, and I don't want to discussion. I don't want to advocate. I don't
Deficit, it was mentioned, not satisfied, that they were not taking enough like anti-colonial or perspectives in their work. So they focused quite a lot actually trying to involve.
It will be really difficult. If somebody thinks so deep about it,
in the Länder
research.
Okay. I think we'll resume now. I'm curious now to hear the conversations that you had. And of course, any burning questions. I'm going to start collecting any questions. Anyone would like to share their thoughts? Please. Thank you. I'm going to repeat each question so our participants through the live stream can also hear it. So her question is, if you are to open, after all this discussion, being very practical, if you are to open a small cafe here, what would be your advice? Anyone would like to go? Luciano.
I would see it on two levels. Of course, there is the consumer level that we spoke about, which is often like voting. It could be simple things like, for example, this is Black Forest water, but it in some kind of plastic thing, and this is tap water from Freiburg as well with my daughter's, bottle. So the small acts that you can implement all around, of course, are very crucial for a cafe. And then it depends on, are you doing it on your own? Is it like yours? Do you want to generate profit? Or is it about, the cafe? Are you ready to work with other people? So if it were like, if we were friends or so, we could organize together. And I would suggest to create a space in which we can have more education, in which we can have food, of course, and think about what kind of, collectively think about what kind of products we want to have there, and or have a system where people can shape that, can influence it or so. And then to think, do you really need like a price? Do you really need to have like a fixed price on whatever you will consume in that cafe, or are there other ways of dealing with money in that place? Maybe you have so are there solidarity forms of dealing with the economics in the place? That would be sort of some ideas for me.
Okay, you don't provide coffee, no? We'll come back to you in a minute. But Samie, sorry.
I just wanted to go next because my thought was similar. The first thought was develop relationships with the farmers around you. But then more than that, I think developing relationships with other cafes around you as well. And I think this is what you're getting at. No, I mean, I feel like I see so many individual companies sourcing themselves, but what if we were creating these collective systems to talk about what we all need and how we can source that collectively, because that often helps farmers be able to provide that. So yeah, I would love to see a new cafe talk to their competition and create more of a system of solidarity there.
Thank you. Yeah, okay, I was just asking, you don't produce coffee, you are not importing coffee.
Yeah, I think if you want to establish such business, you have to look into certain things. One, source. Where do you source your product? In Africa or any other part of the world. In the place where you source your product, there are also other challenges there. We have government policies that regulate most of the exportation of most of their products. We talk about other regulatory bodies. This you have to take into consideration, the source, and how to bring it in Germany. Because when it comes to Germany, you have to go through other regulatory bodies. Sometimes it is not difficult, it's not easy even to sell your product unless you have certain labels in your product. Whether you are satisfied bio, you are satisfied fair for life, or whatever and whatever. I think these are the things you have to bear in mind before venturing into it. Another thing is whether you want to do just like every other person, you come put coffee in the machine and get coffee and eat, or you want to do something different. When you want to do something different, you have to start identifying customers, your customers, and also thinking about diversification. What can you do with coffee? Not just drinking coffee. This is where you can excel then in the business. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I guess it's part of an experience.
Not so easy to add something, but what you should not do, I don't want to see any coffee package with these pictures of really happy, laughing, coffee picking women in colorful clothes. That's what I don't want to, that's what I do not expect in your coffee then. How can we get good relationships between the sources from where the coffee comes, which is a product that was distributed around the food system with colonialism? Maybe you should try to, it's really utopic maybe, but no, we have to try. Maybe we need a kind of partnership. So a coffee shop in Freiburg and a coffee shop in, I don't know where, in Brazil or in Haiti, or where the coffee might come from. And try to find out what people there need and then how they can get information from each other. So how can the coffee producers maybe send some information about their challenges to your small coffee, and what do people here expect, or what do they know, or what do they not yet know, what kind of questions do they have about the coffee they drink. I'm now focusing on coffee, of course. There is tea, there is cocoa, there is different things.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any other question? Please. If you can even maybe come a bit forward just so I can hear it very well. Yeah. Okay. I will try to now convey your question here. So the question, let me know if it's not in the right direction, is about global policies. That I think he started by saying that he heard with interest what Luciano said, how successful his initiative is. But the question is how to maybe perhaps bring this to a global level through policies, and what kind of policies we may need to support that such initiatives and the principles of such initiatives can be also in a broader scale. Is that right? Okay.
Well, it's a very vast field, but I can think of two policies on the global scale that I think would have a large effect. One is the issue of reserves, because before, a lot of areas or nations were able to build food reserves. And whenever you had a bad harvest or a good harvest, or so, when a good harvest, of course, you would put something aside or sell it to another country or whatever. And when you had bad harvest, you could, the prices would go up on the world market, and you can compensate sort of that for the interests of your population by using some of food from the reserves, like cereals or rice or whatever. And throughout the 90s, especially with the World Bank and the IMF, the so-called structural adjustment programs, a lot of countries were forced to get rid of those reserves. It was all about free trade and you want to make money, or basically the capitalists wanted to make money with the fluctuating prices and so on. So I think that would be crucial. It's anti-free trade basically. We need mechanisms to protect local markets or national market, whatever, regional markets by having reserves, because the future will be there will be more and more fluctuation, and this is going to be profitable for the speculators and so on. And we need basically institutional organization, or even on a local level. I was actually a suggestion here in Freiburg to say, let's have our own cereal reserves. Because, as I said, 2018, the world produced less cereals than it consumed in 2019. It was drought, and the cereal production was awful in Europe. And we will have this kind of situations in the future. So if we can rely on local structures to compensate, the situation of prices getting very high and reducing inequalities thereby, I think that would be one of the policies maybe. And the second one I can think of course, is subventions. I mean, especially I think Europe, but also worldwide, the US and so on, there's very high subvention flowing into mass production. The larger your farm, the bigger your machinery, the more subvention you would get. People, and this kind of subvention model we have to get completely rid of. And we as societies, we should be investing that public money into restoring resilience, into creating those reserves, into trainings for people to have more skills, into the seed system, to have that accessible to anyone. The money should be flowing into those kind of things instead of promoting large monocultures and flooding markets with These are two policies I can think of.
Thank you. Do you want to talk about the subsidies?
Not really. Yeah, we wanted to talk about subsidies. We didn't talk about subsidies. So there are those policies that are really, really harmful, and they have to be stopped immediately, although it's really not possible, unfortunately. But that's subsidies, like the subsidies that lead to this kind of overproduction and mass production and land concentration. In Europe, there are so many potatoes being produced. Like in Germany, we have 148% self-sufficiency in potatoes. That means when you eat 2 potatoes, there is a third one, and this one will not be stored locally. Maybe storing of potatoes is not so easy, but the bad thing of the story is that this third potato is really grown because of the subsidies, and then because of the free trade agreements, it can be traded, for instance, to Colombia, mainly as deep frozen potatoes. So now this undercuts the price of the local potato farmers, and this finally leads to the displacement of small-scale farmers, so they won't produce potatoes any longer, and then the story of land concentration starts again, because the free trade agreement also provides subsidies for big producers of palm oil and bananas that are then re-imported into Europe. So we need to stop those subsidies. On the other hand, there is a kind of subsidy like for the Indian farmers who were really protesting in December. These subsidies are really, really helpful to protect them from speculation. So things like harmful policies need to be stopped, and on the other hand, we need more support for, exactly what Luciano said already, trainings and exchange and kind of research in these small supportive agricultural systems, in resilience activities, in all the different kinds of work that is done for the community economy. Maybe instead of giving subsidies to big enterprises and these big corporate farming enterprises, we can use subsidies in this kind of local councils, and then we have to redistribute the power, the decision-making power, and we will see how we can use those subsidies for trainings and for storage and things like that. But that's really a complicated topic.
Anyone wants to still?
I don't think I need to add much to that, and it is just an extremely complicated system that we are dealing with. The only thing I would add is the reacquaintance of what grows where we are, which we are not connected to anymore. And when you do that, you are then potentially changing the food that's available, and therefore you're changing the way that people will relate to their food, and that's really hard because we find a lot of comfort in our food, right? So like while we change these processes, we need to be bringing us all along, and that goes back to food education on how we feed ourselves and how we can find joy and comfort in different types of food, because it will change. It should change if we want to have a climate just future.
Thank you. Anyone else?
One final point on the policy is the seed system. For worldwide, we have a system ruled by patents. The TRIPS agreement, for example, the trade-related intellectual property rights, it's called. But basically, for the moment, we are taking away, the system is taking away a lot of a collectivized means of production, which is this peasant seeds, which can be reproduced and passed on from farm to farm, from generation to generation. And that is a collectivized means of production. And that is being increasingly almost criminalized, you can say, And this is something that has to change on a global scale. Yeah, we need a free system of patent-free system of seed that can be shared, can reproduce, passed on, further developed, and so on.
Stephanie, please. So the question is, you mentioned that there are a lot of fake prices, no? That probably what actually costs to produce that is being upscaled, no? That we are not having the price that it actually costs to produce. Sometimes it's even more, and somebody probably is gaining the money in the value chain there, in the middle. And that you say it needs to reach a lot more people. I don't know if I got your question very well in terms of the loop between the prices and reaching more people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Half maybe, but I've got one idea, because there are many, many different entrance points and keystones that we have to look at, because the system is so complicated. But my first idea was that we have to support the migrant laborers, for instance, in the tomato industry in South Italy. Like, there are about 16,000 migrant laborers without papers working in an industry that is producing very, very cheap tomato paste that is then re-exported to Ghana, for instance. Ghana had a very nice processing industry, and because of the free trade agreement, they were no longer able to produce tomatoes which have a stable price on their own market and on the global market. So we have to look into this solidarity with farmers, with laborers, with this cheap labor. I think this is also one entrance point, but there are others, of course.
I mean, the question was also, in the supermarket, we see a higher price for organic food versus non-organic food, for example. And how do we escape this loop, is what you were asking, no? I don't necessarily have an answer for that, because it's very difficult, but I think one thing that I hope is focused on more is, I mean, what we're talking about right now is the true cost of food, right? This, how do you do true cost accounting? And ultimately, when you pay for cheap food, you're paying for that elsewhere. In your health, we're paying for in our environment. And so, especially coming out of COVID, it was never a dominant narrative that fighting diseases like COVID or any other disease, our first line of defense should be how we're feeding ourselves and what's in our bodies. And so if you start to think about how we pay for food, if we don't pay for it there, we pay for it in our health, maybe that inspires a little bit more change. I mean, there's still so many barriers to this, economic, social barriers to the price of this food, so that I don't have a good answer, but it is, I hope, connecting health and food a little stronger.
And just to also engage here, okay, because when we were talking also, now we had this conversation also with Stephanie before, in your business model also, the idea that maybe this gap now is shortened because you have a more direct contact to the very producers now at the base of the production of your system. So maybe you want to talk about that.
Yeah. Hello? Actually, I think the discrepancies in the price we see in the supermarket lies on the individual agent that brings our food here. The way A bring his own might not be the same way B bring his own food material. A might spend more money and I expect to make gain out of the product. Why B might be the person producing it, so even if he put the price very, very cheap, it will not affect him. In most countries, there are price regulatory organs that put or try to stabilize price of this particular product. Also, it depends on the model each business unit is using to source and distribute their product. if you have a lot of middlemen or agencies in between, the price will be very, very high. The farmers will not receive anything. But if you try and cut these intermediaries as much as possible, you have a better quality product with good price and acceptable in the market. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Luciano, for some final words.
Well, the sort of strategy I can think of is much related to the community-supported community or so, but the way we've done it on a CSA scale has been to get out of the idea of the price. You know, the true cost of food is the true cost of the production and agriculture. So the idea is, as a community, can we raise the necessary money to pay for the production of the food we are going to eat, with all the people being satisfied and also the ecosystems being satisfied and so on. So I think that should be somehow the basis. And then also the community raising the money is not like sharing, everybody has to pay the same. For us, it's, you know, people that are wealthier can maybe pay a bit more, and people that are not so wealthy can pay a bit less. But when we add up all the contributions, we need the necessary money. And we've been successful at that. I think we could try the same, for example, at sort of collective supermarket level. And imagine systems where we will have sort of self-organized community supermarkets where we could, you know, if we are a lot of people, we could have flexible contributions, financial contributions, but with the aim of raising enough money to pay for all the products we are going to offer there. Yeah? And sometimes we may have larger productions of something and sometimes less or so. And then we'll have to find ways of distributing that in solidarity among our communities. I would really like to see us moving towards a system that is seeing food not as a commodity, as I said. Food is not for sale. So I'd like to see that kind of cooperative supermarket emerging in Freiburg in near future.
Thank you, Luciano. It reminds me, I was searching the net, also collecting information more about Solavi, and I saw this sentence that we should remove the price of the food and thereby regaining the value of food. So thank you very much. We have to close the discussion because we have the next discussion coming up. But thank you so much for coming and having this conversation with us here today. We are still going to be around, so please feel free, if you couldn't pose your questions, to catch us here at the Ausgang. So thanks also for the people watching us online, and also for Stephanie. Thanks so much for your support for all of this to happen, and all the organization of the DIY people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks to
Romy.
you.
Thank you, Romy.
For the moderation.
Yeah.